solidarity, to build our movement, to grow our movement. And so we thought it was time right now to bring people together and to have a conversation about where we are, where we're going, and what comes next. And we thought we needed to do that collectively. Everybody feel okay about that agenda? So just specifically, the goals for us when we were sort of brainstorming on this mini summit was to build and strengthen relationships between representatives. So we didn't reach out to every single person in every single group. We wanted at least representatives from as many groups as possible to come together who are working in OC for one afternoon, to pull together our strengths to defend the dignity of people experiencing homelessness, and to identify one or two major actions that we might collectively engage in this year. And that's just, does anybody want to add anything? I think, like Heidi said, if we're going to do that, we're going to need next steps. And that's built into our agenda today, once we decide what it is that we're doing. So I'm going to spend like about 15 minutes just with a basic introduction, and then we're going to get to work. And I welcome like comments and questions as I'm talking. But I always like to start out just bringing us back down to reality, what it is that we're fighting for here. So I want to talk about two people who've been impacted by homelessness. The first person is Ellen, a woman I know who is 73 years old. She lost her home in the foreclosure crisis in 2009, and soon after that she became homeless. She went to put her name on the waiting list for affordable housing in 2009, and she found, to her utter shock, that the list was actually closed. She couldn't even get on the list. She waited 2 long years until February of 2012, when the list opened for 2 short weeks, and she was ecstatic that she was able to get on that list. But her joy soon turned to sadness when she realized how far down she was on that list, how many people were ahead of her, and the public officials, the service people who she talked to, told her, you've got at least a 5 to 10 year wait to get affordable housing. Well, she was homeless and getting older, and so she thought, what am I going to do? Right now, she's living in a car. She's still waiting to get to the top of the list 5 years later. She pays $700 a month to rent this car, but soon she won't be able to afford that because one of her sources of income is going away. She's been relying on Social Security and workers' compensation. So when workers' compensation ends, she will no longer be able to afford to rent that car, and she'll literally be on the street. And this woman is terrified. She calls me asking, what can she do, right? Well, I can't get her to the top of the waiting list any faster. We have to advocate for more housing. The second person I want to mention is Katrina, a young woman. She's in her 30s, and she was homeless in Orange County for several years. Katrina was raised to think of the police as people who were there to protect her from harm. But this belief ended when she became homeless. When the local shelter turned her away for lack of space, when she tried to use it, she was forced to live outside. But when she slept outside, she found that she was violating laws that made it a crime to sleep in public, even though she had no place else no place else to go. Like most women, she wanted to avoid being outdoors alone in the middle of the night. It's not safe. So when the shelter turned her away, she usually slept in the shelter parking lot, figuring that it was safer than venturing out into the surrounding canyons. She figured that if worse came to worse, and if there was danger, if she felt that she was in danger, at least she could pound on the doors, on the locked doors of the shelter, and a staff member could come out and help her. But police would pull into the parking lot in the middle of the night, and they would tell her to move along, to go somewhere else. They would tell her she was breaking the law by sleeping outside, but they didn't give her anywhere else to go because there was no other place for her to go in the middle of the night. She knew that the police weren't there to protect her then. Worse, they put her in harm's way. As she put it, when the police drive me out of the shelter parking lot in the middle of the night, it feels like they're telling me, yeah, go out there and hopefully you will get attacked and die. It will be one less person for us to worry about. So that's how these ordinances and the enforcement of these ordinances made Katrina feel. I think those of us in this room share a belief that what has happened to Ellen and Katrina is not right. We share a belief that all people have the right to live in dignity. That means having access to an adequate standard of living below which nobody falls. It means being free of government persecution and harassment for the crime, the so-called crime, of being too poor to afford a safe, sanitary, and decent place to live. And such rights should not be controversial. In fact, they are enshrined in the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So on the international world stage, these are inalienable rights, and we're violating them in this country and in this county every day. In fact, too many of our elected officials do not share our values or our vision. We know that. That is one reason we are here. Too many believe that they can ignore the humanitarian crisis in our midst with impunity. In fact, too often they believe that they are more likely to get reelected if they punish, because I see these ordinances as punishing people who have no other choice, rather than respect their most economically deprived constituents. And so far, unfortunately, they may not be too far off of the mark, at least at the moment. And that is another reason that we are here today, because I have observed that there is still too much hatred and fear of homelessness outside of this room. There is too much blame and scapegoating of people with the greatest needs. For too many people, the persecution of those experiencing homelessness seems natural and even desirable, and I'm sure we've all heard it. I don't want those people in my park. I don't want them near my home. Just get rid of them. So we have lots of work to do. We're already doing it. One of our tasks is to change that narrative, and in doing so, to change the hearts and minds of both our elected officials and just the public at large, our friends and neighbors, our relatives. What we need is a social movement, because social movements tend to bring about those kinds of changes. And in fact, I see a movement building. Those of us in this room are already speaking truth to power, and many of us have been for many years, each in our own way. We are already telling our elected officials that they have it wrong. We already are demanding that they respect the dignity and the rights of the most economically deprived among us. The number of groups and individuals in this county that you represent and that are addressing homelessness is growing. And this growth brings us to a turning point, I feel. I feel that we are now at a turning point in this county. With the strength that comes from our numbers, we have an opportunity to make a really large impact. We have the capacity to change hearts and minds, and we can make it impossible for elected officials to ignore us. We can help tear down injustice and create the society that we envision. So I know that some of us in our conversations with elected officials have been told by those officials, no, it's not possible. You're setting your sights too high. This is unrealistic. It can't be done. So should we not set our sights too high? Is justice too difficult in a place like Orange County? It's not LA County, people keep telling me. It's Orange County. You can only expect so much. Are we asking for too much? Because sometimes it is what we're told. But consider this, and this is my little pep talk. Think about the victories of past social movements. Voting rights for women, for example. It now seems as natural, inevitable, and unquestionable that women have the right to vote as the air we breathe. But none of this was inevitable at the time. The organizers, the agitators, the advocates of the past were railing against systems that had been around for generations, sometimes for centuries, when you think about things like the institution of slavery. For most people, the social order in which they lived must have seemed just as natural, inevitable, and even righteous. It took the vision of the dreamers and the fighters, the suffragettes and the abolitionists, the Underground Railroad, the freedom riders, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the labor activists, the progressives, and more. That is our history, to imagine the unimaginable, what was unimaginable at the time, and to fight tirelessly and without compromise to make their vision a reality. Change has always been the rule, not the exception. Change has always been the rule, and it's up to us to make sure that that change goes in the correct direction, in the direction of justice. And so now today is our turn to create change. I truly believe this is our moment. So our goals for the mini summit, again, are threefold. One, to serve as an opportunity to build relationships among representatives of all of the groups that are gathered here, establish some overarching goals that we can get behind, and to identify and commit to some actions that will show the county, show our elected officials that we are here, we are strong, and we are not going away. Through solidarity, we can create a social movement that is large, powerful, urgent, full of righteous anger, fierce, impossible to ignore. The need for our combined efforts has never been greater. I want to spend 5 minutes before we start our work for the day just going over the basic landscape of homelessness in Orange County. We need to kind of know where we are if we're going to know, where we're going. And so often I feel our public officials perpetuate myths that sort of distract us from the reality of homelessness in this county. So number one, we do know that homelessness is growing. I mean, it grew between 2013 and 2015, and now we've just had another point in time count in January, and I haven't talked to a single person who thinks that it has not grown since 2015. I mean, we'll see. The numbers have not been released yet. But it is growing, and part of the reason it's growing is because this county does not have enough funding to house our homeless population. But our elected officials perpetuate several myths. I stand before them quite often, and I've noticed this, and so I'm going to mention them, that distract us from this reality and undermine support for what needs to be done. These myths let our local governments, especially the county, off the hook, but we don't need to let that happen. The first myth, we're doing so much already. County officials, and I will single out Andrew Doe here, like to pretend that they already spend a lot of money on ending homelessness, but they really don't. And in fact, the money that they include when they throw out huge numbers includes money that comes from federal and state funding sources. But even that is not enough. So they'll say, oh, we spend, X million dollars on affordable housing. Well, that's federal funding. But that funding goes to occupied apartments. That funding at the federal level hasn't grown. It hasn't increased in over 10 years. That's why Ellen is waiting between 5 and 10 years to get to the top of the list. And that's why the list only opens for 2 weeks out of every several years. What would happen if it stayed open all the time? So many people would sign up on that list that nobody would ever get to the top. It would take longer than a lifetime to get to the top. So they open it just every once in a while. We have an incredible shortage, and our elected officials are throwing out huge numbers, making it seem like they're just pouring money into this issue, and they're not. The second myth is that we have all the housing that we need, and that's the only conclusion I can come to interpret the claim by our public officials that doing more outreach and the new Anaheim shelter and the courtyard, which is sort of an open air shelter, their purpose is to link people to housing, as if the housing to end homelessness was just sitting there waiting to be filled. But these are empty promises, as Ellen knows. And I just want to give a very quick example, because it's, this county just drives me crazy. But coordinated entry. So who knows what coordinated entry is? Yeah, one person. So the county was forced to create this system called coordinated entry, whereby every single person who's homeless and is going to get housed has to go through this coordinated entry system, where they get assessed by an outreach worker for eligibility, like let's say for permanent supportive housing or affordable housing, and then they get all their paperwork together, and then they get matched to housing, and then they get linked to housing, right? And the program started with it went online with great fanfare in July of 2015. So they started doing outreach, they started doing intakes. In about a month, they had like 93 intakes, but nobody was housed. And so I remember sitting there in a meeting with public officials, and the public officials were like, what's happening? We're doing these intakes. Why aren't we actually housing people? And they were like, oh, well, there's a couple of issues. It's taking longer than we thought it would to get all of the paperwork together. But here in one of their own PowerPoint presentations from around that time, they also have a slide called HUD-funded permanent supportive housing providers. So this is their permanent supportive housing, and they go through all of the different providers. And the first one is American Family Housing, no open vacancies. Anaheim Supportive Housing, no open vacancies. Colette's Children's Home, no open vacancies. Friendship Shelter, no open vacancies. Illumination Foundation, no open vacancies. The John Henry Foundation, no open vacancies. Mercy House, pending. Maybe there will be some vacancies pretty soon. Orange County Housing Authority, pending. Maybe there will be some openings soon. Veterans First, no open vacancies. That's it. So there were no actual housing units, vacant housing units to put these people in. Next, I don't know if I have enough for everybody, but I went to the trouble here of creating a little bar chart. So from when coordinated entry started in June of 2015 to April, and this goes from there to April of 2017, this chart shows the number of people that have been housed in the county in permanent supportive housing. There's a smaller number that have been housed through rapid rehousing, which is actually time-limited subsidized housing. And then all of that outreach, all of the people that they have reached, that they've done the assessment for, and that they've entered into the system. And what you see is that from July of 2015 to April of 2017, they've actually housed 224 people of the thousands of people that are homeless in this county in permanent supportive housing. But they've done intakes on people who are still waiting for housing on 2,392 people. And that list just keeps growing. I mean, that's the number that keeps growing. So I'm going to just, people can have copies of this if they want. I always just kind of like to get back to the numbers, because it's like the elected officials tell us one story, but the numbers tell us another story. And that story is, you can do a lot of outreach, you can, get people into the system, but if the housing's not there, and if the funding's not there for that housing, those people are just going to stay on the list. And truly the list is just growing and growing and growing as we speak. That's my little spiel. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but we're going to be together all afternoon, so we'll be able to we'll be able to chat more. The last thing I wanted to say, and just more bad news. We depend so heavily on federal funding, but the national landscape won't improve anytime soon, and I think people really need to be thinking about that. Trump's budget proposal calls for a 14% decrease in HUD funding, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and that's where we get most of our funding to end homelessness in this county is from HUD. So it's already not sufficient. It already isn't reaching most people who are actually homeless now and living on the streets. And so what's going to happen if those cuts occur? It's going to take the people who are already in subsidized housing and push them back out on the street, a certain number of them. So things are just going to get worse instead of better. The good news is we live in a rich county. We live in a county that could easily end homelessness. It just doesn't have the political will to do so yet. I think what we're about today is making it a political liability for this county to ignore this problem and to treat the people that we're here representing with disrespect, which is oftentimes what they do. Any comments? Thoughts before we move on? Yes, Heidi.
I just want to say, I want to give a round of applause to you. I just love hearing everything you're saying, and it's
Right on.
heartwarming, yes, so thank you very much.
Well, what's heartwarming to me is a group this large that's going to come together and just also on a Sunday afternoon to do this work. And also what's heartwarming to me is, I know some of you I don't know, but I know so many of you in this room, people like Heidi, who have just, put their heart and soul into this issue. And I want to give a round of applause for everybody in this room.
You forgot one myth, that they don't want help.
Nobody wants help. Well, that's because homelessness is a choice. It's a lifestyle, right?
If I could just jump in.
Yes.
Larry Haynes, I was talking to him at the opening of the Finger Shelter on Thursday, and I asked him, what's the goal here? What's the point of this? He said, well, to get people ready for housing. And I said, well, what portion of people aren't ready for housing? And his response was, we have never met a person who wasn't ready for housing. So
By the way,
Sounds like a tattoo.
I went on the 20th to see the opening of the shelter, because that's what someone from the county had mentioned at a city council meeting in Anaheim. And it didn't open. I wasn't surprised. But then again, I guess I must not have been on the waiting list because I didn't know about the 21st opening. I mean, the recent opening was a couple days ago, right?
Right.
Right, so, I mean, there was a lot of us that worked hard. Worked really hard to get Fullerton and Santa Ana denied, and then get Anaheim passed. And I mean, and all the work to be put into it too. And they're not going to invite other people that advocates to celebrate as well. I found that
Maria was one of those people too.
I found
who worked for
that
years.
kind of exclusive. Anyway, go
I
ahead.
wasn't invited either.
Oh, okay. I'm for that.
So this is Maria, and she's going to help organize us into our breakout groups and kind of explain what that means.